It is Friday, May 6th, very, very late at night. This is episode 62 of the MacNN Podcast.
Ooh, podcast.
If you hadn't noticed, Charles is not with us today. That would be Jordan, my cohort of old. Jordan, how you been?
I'm doing all right. How about yourself?
Well, you know, things could be better, but things could be a whole lot worse. But we'll delve into that in the coming weeks. Let's just jump right into it. There's a lot of stuff to talk about this week. Intel has decided that they're not going to do any more Atom processors. Now, keep in mind, they're not ditching the M series processors as found in the MacBook and other machines, but the Z series processors have seen the end days.
It's kind of sad in a way.
It is and it isn't. The Broxton chip is completely gone. That's the next generation of Atom chip. Most of the Atoms are ending up in smartphones, but we all know how well Intel-based smartphones are doing in the market these days.
Yeah, not so great.
Not so great. Something like less than 1% of the market share. As far as Windows coherency goes, as far as the handoff from Windows 10 to mobile, how do you think that's going to affect that?
They already have the chips for kind of that subset. When you look at all what the Core M's that they have mostly, and we're seeing a trend where, you know, everybody's mostly going to tablet-based or tablet PCs in general. Mm-hmm. So it's not surprising to see them ditch these smaller chips, especially when they're still trying to push the envelope on the processors and for desktops.
Some of the venues, not us, are spinning specifically that it's the Apple A series processor that crushed the Atom series chip. But let's be clear about this. The Atom has existed in one form or another for 9 years, and that predates the iPad. It's been fairly healthy, but I think, honestly, that this has got more to do with Intel's fortunes overall than it does with defeat in mobile or anything like that. Because you're right, they still have the M3, the M5, the M7, and I'm not sure that this isn't anything more than just saying, well, we've got the M series. What do we need Broxton for?
And just the way that their processor shift is going in general, we've gone from this heavy-duty, high-heat Haswell processors that are, you know, desktop performance machines, and now you see them more dipping in Broadwell, Skylake, and you can see as they're trying to crush everything down in the footprint that the computing power isn't going as far. So they might just be hitting that point where it's like, well, why do we need this line anymore?
It still seems strange to call the Haswell the high heat, high energy chip.
Well, it is.
Well, compared to the new models, yeah. But when Haswell came out, it's like, hey, look how much we can squeeze out of our battery with Haswell. This is great. This rocks. And now it's like, oh no, that old crap, forget that. Intel's hurting. They are getting ready to lay off. They're in the process of laying off 12,000 people before the end of this year. The company's not in any danger. They're still turning a profit. It's not as much as they want to. They're very much tied to the PC market. And the PC market has experienced a downturn, not just from tablets, but from just people saying, well, you know, my desktop is fine at 3 gigahertz. Do I really need one at 4?
Well, even still, you always have dips in the PC market. That's just the way it always is. And yeah, now that we're seeing an or a longer end of life cycle for PCs, like my gaming rig, I would do every 4 years, maybe replace some RAM or a video card in between cycles. But I'm getting close to year 6 on this one and still not a whole lot of reason to upgrade.
Yeah, I've got my MacBook Pro is a 2012 model, and it's Retina and it's i7, sure, but this is its 4th year of operation.
Yeah, my 2011 still is great.
There was a point where I would swap over laptops every 24 to 30 months, and I'm not saying it's not Apple hardware is the problem, it's just I don't need any more power to speak of.
Well, it's just the longevity of where we've hit the curve. Mm-hmm. It's the whole silicon thing anyway, because eventually we're not going to be able to squeeze anything else out of it.
Well, here's the interesting thing. I actually have a Z series Kangaroo on my desktop, and if you're not familiar with the Kangaroo is, Amber did a review of it, and I've got the Pro version of it. The Kangaroo is not hugely larger than a 6 Plus, an iPhone 6 Plus. It's thicker, but it's got a quad-core Z series Atom processor in it, and I've got it hooked up to a 26-inch monitor, and it surfs fine, it streams from iTunes fine. It does, even that Z series processor does 90% of my daily computing use, yeah, for better or for worse. Right? It's 1.4 gigahertz with a peak of 2.7 or something like that. Let's just think about this. This is an Atom processor that can peak at 2.7 gigahertz.
Yeah. Who would have thought about that 10 years ago?
So, it's ridiculous. I mean, I'll be honest. This is like a good old games X-Wing box. That's really what this is for. And it really does it quite well. So
couldn't you even argue, though, that this is just another compression of the market?
Yeah, I think you can. I think that this is, in some regards, Intel shedding dead weight. In other regards, is shedding a duplicate product line that it just doesn't need, given the power sipping of the new M series processors.
I mean, what AMD gave up on theirs, year and a half ago, 2 years ago, on their smaller form factor ones?
Yeah, I think that there just wasn't enough money to be made in it. AMD was literally making fractions of a cent off each processor that they were selling on their mobile side, on their small processor side. And I can't imagine the profit margins are that much higher for Intel on this.
No, and then if you think about all the companies out there making ARM chips, it's kind of, you have a little more leeway than you do in the desktop market, but it wouldn't be surprising to me to see it just kind of go back to Samsung, and the like, or even Nvidia with their series, with what they're doing for a while. But they're also all manufactured in basically two spots.
Just about. I mean, the rumors are this week related to this is TSMC has got the A11 chip taped out, which means that they have the preliminary design for the chip that's after the next generation of Apple products. And I don't know how much I buy that, but given how the market is going and given how everything else is going, it wouldn't surprise me. And I don't think this is going to really affect that much. I think companies that have Intel-based smartphones are going to go, whatever. And they're going to shift to an M, or they're going to shift to an ARM processor and just go on with life. I really don't see this affecting much of anything other than Intel. And I think it's only positive for Intel.
Well, couldn't you also see it being as a problem in the manufacturing line? Because so many of these places, they are, if what they say is true, multiple years out, they're all scheduled. So it's like you have to have your stuff ready to go. And maybe they didn't see the market. They didn't know where they're going to be in 2 years. They just can't push the envelope on what they have anymore. So they're like, let it go and let's use the time to build the next desktop PCs.
Yeah, Broxton has been on the roadmap for 3 years.
Yeah.
So what that does as far as other supply chain issues, I really don't even know.
It's just one of those things behind the scenes that you never know plays a factor in these kind of decisions.
You never can quite figure out how it sorts out, right?
Yeah, it's Intel's wonky anyway. I mean, the whole TikTok scheme confuses people all the time.
Well, they said not long ago, now it's like tick-tock-tock.
Yeah.
Where instead of one process improvement, they're taking 2 process improvement steps. And really the issue they're hiding there is they're having problems with their smaller and smaller and smaller die sizes.
No, man, the shift to Broadwell took forever.
It did. And I think that's going to continue to be the case. I think that, I forget the next name, but I think that that's going to continue to be a problem going forward.
No, and it very well could be. But again, as we've said, with desktops and just devices in general going as long as they have, do they really need to, or could they just take advantage of that and use that extra time to improve further?
Well, Apple has decided that desktops are passé. Even the iMac uses mobile-based processors that don't use the larger desktop processors. And manufacturers like HP and Dell, the big boys, are selling more and more and more machines like the iMac using mobile class hardware. Now, it's less of an issue than it was with the Core Duo and the Core 2 Duo chips, and the thermal load from these chips, even full out, is not nearly as bad as it used to be. Are we going to see this shift to using more of the mobile side on the Windows side as well, do you think? Or do you think that the market for towers and mini towers is going to stay about the same as it is now, that sits about 12% of all computer sales?
Well, with Windows 10, I think they're going to help push that along some. There really isn't any reason to use Windows 10 on a desktop compared to something like a Surface. You're not gaining anything either way, and Surfaces were actually pretty good. I'm lucky enough to be able to play around with a 2 and a 3 Pro. And man, they're bulky, but they can pretty much do anything.
I am on record on this podcast for saying that I'm very happy with the Surface engineering. I've had the opportunity to play with a Surface Pro, or the original Surface Pro, and a Surface 4, and they're very, very solid machines. There have been some shifts over time, like it's a different pen from the Surface 1 to the Surface 4.
Oh yeah, like you have the Wacom enabled ones in the 2.
Yeah, I'm not really, that's a little bit beyond my threshold of knowledge, I'm afraid. I never really decided to delve into that much. But they're very well engineered. Even the Surface 1, they said, wow, this gets so hot. It never really got that hot. The earlier Core 2 Duo machines, the nut burners, for lack of a better term, were much worse as far as hotspots were. So
we're just going that way. I don't think you can help it. We've taken such a shift away from the desktop and more towards lap-based browsing or couch-based browsing that it's absurd to think that just the bulk of consumerism is gonna take us that way. I mean, I'm a PC gamer, so I don't want them to go away, but we've
established with our polling that most of Apple's customers, even if they're buying a Mac, they're not looking at buying even an iMac. They're looking at buying a MacBook or a MacBook Pro. And the consumers we spoke with are really happy with the MacBook. It's not personally machined for me, and it's not personally machined for most of our readers and our listeners. Just because of just our demographics. We're more MacBook Pro people. Most of our readers have been around for a very long time.
And man, that one port is so so divisive.
Yeah, the one port is a problem. And the biggest problem I have on the MacBook with the one port is the bandwidth on it. It's a 5 gigabit per second port. And we have all these docking ports and plug in 3 USB devices and a card reader and all these things. And if you start doing high bandwidth things like video through the USB, you're choking out the 5 gigabits on the USB port.
Yeah.
So it'd be better with a full USB-C implementation. Well, hell, it'd be better with, and this is what bugged me about the new MacBook. We're all over the place with this, obviously. But what bugged me with the new MacBook is that it wasn't Thunderbolt 3. Thunderbolt 3 at 40 gigabits is going to be more than enough for anything, and you can plug in all of these docking stations, assuming it's a Thunderbolt docking station, and have more than enough bandwidth across USB for anything you'd want to do, including 4K video in addition to other things.
No, let's not think about how DisplayPort fits into all that too.
Well, DisplayPort, we'll go over it very quickly. DisplayPort is integral to the Thunderbolt protocol. So if you plug in a DisplayPort into a Thunderbolt thing, Thunderbolt says, oh, okay, well, this is DisplayPort, we're good to go. Because if you look at your MacBook Pro versus my MacBook Pro, we have the same size port. Mm-hmm. Yours is a DisplayPort, and mine is Thunderbolt. And it's exactly the same physicality on the port.
Yep.
So that's a little bit different with Thunderbolt 3. Thunderbolt 3 uses the USB-C form factor. This is where it gets really wacky. USB-C is contained within Thunderbolt 3, but not vice versa. You can have Thunderbolt 3 and not Thunderbolt, but if you have Thunderbolt, you have USB-C. So
gotta love that.
Go figure. I would have been fine with 2 different port sizes, honestly. This whole one port to rule them all, I'm not so sure how well that's going to go.
Do they have better cables yet?
well, Thunderbolt 3 is funny because Thunderbolt 3, you can have the transceiver-based cable for the full speed, but those are still $40 or $50 cables. Or you can have what's called a passive cable, which will give you 10 gigabit speeds. And those are going to be monoprice cables. Those are going to be $8, $6, $5 cables for Thunderbolt 1 speeds through the Thunderbolt 3 bus. So it's going to be interesting to see. And then there's USB-C, which is 10 gigabit on USB. But that's, again, we just went over the craziness with that. So you ask if there are better cables, yes and no.
I'm just tired of my MacBook cable.
Which cable are you tired of?
The MagLock.
The MagLock? Well, why is the MagSafe? It's MagSafe, actually.
MagSafe, sorry.
Why is the MagSafe bugging you? Is it just the fraying?
Oh, yeah. Apparently I'm lucky for only going to need to be on my third one since 2011.
My MacBook Pro is mostly a desktop replacement. So I've actually had this MagSafe for 2 years now. But yeah, when I was more mobile and I was swinging that cable around, the frays were terrible. So I'm not super fond of the MagSafe myself, but
everyone I get is covered in about 3 feet of electrical tape. So
there are a couple of products that help that. I have a blue bracket on one of the ends of my MagSafe, but that's never the end that I've had a problem with fraying. The end I've always had a problem with fraying is up here near the cable head.
Yep.
So, and I haven't seen anything really. I guess Sugru, what's that stuff called? It's that modeling clay stuff. I guess people are forming that around the head of their MagSafe to prevent fraying, but being that the MagSafes, if you get them on sale, you can get them for $30 these days, an actual Apple one. Maybe the next time we put one in our deal post for $30, you just buy like 6 of them.
Yeah, it's getting to be that way.
Yeah. Well, it's also a 2011. It might be getting a little long in the tooth.
It still works.
Were you affected by the GPU recall?
No, actually.
Really? No kidding.
I had some issues where I thought it was kind of cutting out and dropping on things, but I never got the full-blown video issue where it just kind of killed the screen. So, cross fingers, I might be lucky.
Yeah. Which would you rather have, a fully failed and sent it in for repair, or something that lives,
Yeah. It's always been on the back of my mind. It's like, should I have broke it, sent it
in? Should I have wrapped it in a towel and run it anyway, just to get the fix?
Yeah. You never.
Okay, anyway, let's play the music. Let's move on to our next rambling topic of conversation. So Epic, Unreal Tournament people, Gears of War people, they have decided that they are out of the big budget game market.
Ooh, I'm not surprised by that.
Why are you not surprised by that? Then we'll talk about it.
Well, they've been pretty slow on actually putting out anything for a little while, but they've kind of expanded on why that occurred. But mostly when you're selling an engine that the majority of games use, with a actually really reasonable rate, which is the surprising part, you kind of don't need to be making as many games as you did before.
Yeah, that was going to be my point as well. The Unreal Engine is cross-platform. They actually have it for iOS as well. Mm-hmm. And they're doing very well with it. And if you look at all the splash screens on everything, it's either powered by Unity or powered by the Unreal Engine, depending on what you're looking at.
Yeah, and you have a couple other out there, like the Sirius Engine or Crytek. But
well, who's using the Sirius Engine now?
Pretty much just Crow Team.
Okay.
I think they license it out to a couple other things, but it's still a good engine.
I haven't seen that in a while. Yeah, I remember seeing it. I haven't seen it lately, but admittedly, I'm a bit behind. And that's the whole point. They finished Gears of War and handed it off to another developer for the new Gears of War title. I guess is coming out this winter. They had very little to do with the Gears of War remaster for the Xbox One, and they just, you're right. They don't need asset development teams. They don't need a huge base of coders. They don't need writers. They don't need to generate their own universe anymore.
Well, everything after Judgment was just passed on to Microsoft under Black Tusk, I think.
Black Tusk, yeah, I think you're right on that. So I think this is just a natural evolution of the process. I mean, in one way, it's disappointing because Epic has been doing these games for a very long time. I played the original Unreal Tournament for, I want to say 6 or 7 years. I never got super good at it, mind you, but I played it.
That also makes you wonder, though, do they necessarily need to keep making those kind of games? Because if you think about every Unreal game, or every Epic game in general, they're mostly tied to a strong multiplayer platform.
That is true. It's the economics of some of these things is getting rough too. They literally tonight, EA rolled out was it Battlefront 1?
Oh yeah.
No, excuse me. They rolled out Call of Duty 1, which goes back to some alternate history World War I thing. And the estimates I'm seeing online is that this game cost them $225 million to make.
That's ridiculous.
And that's an insane amount of money. That they're going to get it back. They're going to get it back $60 at a time, right? But that is crazy. And these kind of budgets honestly are, I think, what's helped usher in the renaissance of indie development. I think that a bunch of guys in a garage can viably make a game, and if they can somehow be discovered on Steam, which is an entirely different issue, then they have a reasonable chance of doubling their money with a quality product.
Well, it's kind of interesting. Have you seen, I believe it's Video Game the Movie, the documentary?
I have seen it.
And they talk about how you have these huge production, these huge teams at a studio putting these games together, and people are trying to, compare them to an indie developer. Well, when you have stockholders and all this other people to account to and things going on with the company and so many people involved in the machine, sure, you might have a great idea, but if it's going to take you so much time to implement it, you can't change the direction of 200 people.
Yeah, it's easier to be nimble with a small team than it is with a large team.
Yeah, and especially when you keep the stuff in-house, you don't have to answer to any kind of publisher. That's why these kind of decisions, I think, will be more and more popular for these kind of strong-name developers. You're never going to see someone like Ubisoft crank out these little titles. They've had some nice ones. Child of Light was pretty good. Or the other one, the World War I story kind of narrative one. I forget what that was called off the top of my head.
This War of Mine.
No, that's 11-bit.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Anyway, but these big name publishers, EA, DICE, you're never going to see them step away from this.
The 3 games that I've had the most fun with for the last year, from this time last year. Destiny, I'm well on record for saying that I'm a Destiny freak. Broforce, which it's a fun 80s styled shoot 'em up, and we've talked about this game before as well, but it is the epitome of indie development. And Broforce started in one of those game jams, in one of those 24-hour game jams. And the third one is still from a larger shop, but it's not a huge shop. It's actually not even Civilization 5, it's Civilization 4. Civilization 5 is good. Civilization 4 is more satisfying when I'm going to march my tank legions across the territory. The best estimate I saw on Civilization 4 development, it cost them maybe $3.5 million to make.
Yeah, that's just staggering.
What, that is so low?
Well, for a big budget title, yeah, that is pretty low.
Yeah.
But just trying to wrap my mind around that. But then think about how many people you have cranking at that game.
Yeah, Firaxis is not a small studio, but that's not a lot of money for that game. As far as I can tell, and this one's hard, Broforce cost about $125,000 to make. And Destiny, well, the saga of Destiny is long and storied and it involves many multinational companies, so we're just going to leave that there. But that's another $500 million title, realistically, including marketing.
Just the marketing over that's just
Well, here's the thing. Well, yeah, and how cheap is it to license Led Zeppelin music, right?
Or get Paul McCartney to write you a song.
Well, the legend is on that Paul McCartney decided on his own that he wanted to do that, but I don't know.
I don't think he's going to do it for free, though.
Yeah, you never know. It's when you get to be somebody like Paul McCartney, you can pretty much do what the hell you want. And Destiny is, Bungie's 10-year title, right? So we're going to see more of that, and who knows how much of that 500 million carries over year to year. But in any event, like everything else in our industry, like computing, like tablets, gaming is shifting as well. And it started with the proliferation of mobile. I mean, look at some of the big guys in mobile. King, they're hurting. They're hurting bad. These are the Candy Crush people. Zynga just barely turned a profit, but the building they own is worth more than the company, okay? Rovio, Angry Birds was everywhere, and they're hurting too.
Partly it has to do with indie developers, because you can churn out something even as a hobby, and you never know where it's gonna take off. It could be, look at Flappy Bird. A ridiculous game, took no time to develop, but
Downwell.
It just has that hook that hits the right time for consumers. That's just a pick up and drop game. You never have to have this huge investment of time in it. And we've gone that way. And that's kind of the mindset I think developers need to look for the future.
I think you're right. I think the Steam model, as far as more sales cheaper, it has to be the future for this kind of thing. I'm just not sure that AAA titles at what looks like is going to be $70 this Christmas and maybe more.
Oh, man.
I'm not sure how. Well, look at some of the collector's editions. They're $250 and $300.
Yeah, let's not even get started on the pre-sale collector editions. How's it going?
Oh, geez. Pre-sales is an entirely different thing, and I've always hated
Yeah,
pre-sales.
I'm glad they backed down on that in Mankind Divided.
So but yeah, pre-sales, topic for another day.
Yeah. But back with Epic, you can kind of see they were going this direction with Fortnite. They've kept a lot of details down. They've kind of hinted at what was going on. But then you have their other area with Paragon, and you can kind of see, okay, here we going. And then you step back, less than a year ago, said, oh, hey, we're working on Unreal Tournament again, and we're just going to release it for free.
Yeah, that astounded me.
And you're like, okay, so how is this going to happen? But again, if you really think about it, Epic's strength was always the multiplayer. Gears had great multiplayer. Unreal Tournament, great multiplayer. I can't even remember how many hours I spent just playing that, even with bots, because that was the structure it was around.
Deck 16, man.
Yeah, and there's no other companies that I can think. Most people will go, oh, Infinity Ward, Call of Duty. It's like, no, man, I'm talking about actual fast-paced shooters. You have, ID or id, however you want to pronounce it, and Epic are the top two. And it's great to see Bethesda back a new Doom. So I can't wait for that. But it makes you wonder if we're going to see another one.
Yeah, well, time will tell with that, with most of this stuff. And once upon a time, Jordan and I had a different podcast. In our very first episode, we were talking about the rumors of remastered Halo. Because at the time, they were just that. And it's interesting how these things progress, because it didn't quite come out exactly when they thought it was going to based on the rumor, but it did ultimately come out. So, and Epic's plan moving away from big budget games, I think, is only part of the story, like we've been talking about.
But then you also have games like Overwatch that are coming out this month, with this something nobody ever thought Blizzard would drop. Yeah,
Overwatch is kind of nuts from Blizzard. It's kind of against how they've done things.
Yeah, it's a model that's kind of worked for Diablo, but not in the same manner.
Not quite the same way.
You're still dropping money for the game up front, but they have such a huge infrastructure in Battle.net, like you couldn't see it not being utilized for something like this.
That noise I'm hearing is all of our regular listeners going to another podcast. So I'm gonna play the music, and we're gonna move on to something else. So apparently Apple is looking for 800,000 square feet of real estate for an automotive test track in Cupertino. In Cupertino itself, mind you, not the outskirts of Cupertino. They want this in Cupertino. Additionally, they've hired somebody away from Google's self-driving car. Apple Car. I've discussed it at length with Charles. What is your thought on this matter?
I don't see why not.
Okay.
That's where we're going.
Well, that was not exactly what I was expecting.
It's like, yep. No, it's
at least 4 years out.
It's still one of those ideas that it's so planted in the future that it's hard to wrap your head around. Yeah, and I've never had the chance to actually see one of these cars driving around, so maybe if I actually had it, it would sink in a little bit. But there's so many hats in the ring, you have to think that this is all going to hit at once, and you're going to have all these land grabs and all these, like facility building out and all these manufacturers chipping in to high turnout parts. And I think all of that's going to hit at once. So a company coming in, buying these huge test facilities and manufacturing plants that can just crank all this out in small batches, they're going to be the ones ahead.
I think Google has such a commanding lead on this that if they were going to do something mass market, I think they're going to beat Apple by at least 2 years on that. And it's going to turn into another platform war. It's going to turn into another, well, I've got the Apple car. Oh yeah, well, I've got the Google car and I can do this with this. What about you? It's going to turn into the race wars, basically,
Yeah, I think that's going to be a little bit different though, because you have to remember Google doesn't always turn out a finished product, Alphabet doesn't always turn out a finished
moonshot projects are bleeding money.
Oh yeah.
And it's not necessarily a good thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing. They're a little bit more public about their bleeding than Apple is. Apple has always had tons of things that they have never released, and they don't really talk about it. Google, on the other hand, said, oh, nope, this doesn't work. Let's just take these patents and open source them, and people dig through them later and go, oh my God, you were working on this?
No, and you have to know that was a big idea in the restructuring and calling it Alphabet so they can put all these in another place, and Google search stops showing this massive loss for all these things.
Yeah, huge tax benefits for them doing that. So I was, before this discussion about Apple looking for this huge property, I was reasonably convinced that Apple wanted no part of transmissions and motors and things of that nature, but I'm not so sure now.
I would think that they would play more to their strengths. So they will build the electrical, the navigation, the brains of the car, and they will partner with someone else, maybe not someone that we've necessarily heard of in the States, to make it over here.
Yeah, there's been a couple rumors, and we're going to put them in the podcast notes about all the rumor roundups that Charles has written about this kind of thing. There are too many signs pointing that this is going to be a finished product. And Tim Cook frequently says that we have lots of things that we don't ever finish just because we don't see a potential for them. And this is just moving too far. Now, they've hired people for batteries, which can be argued that it's not just for the car. It can be argued that the extra hour that they squeaked out of the new MacBook is because of re-engineering the battery. There's people they've hired for CNC milling, and people are saying, well, it's for the car, but it can also be, Apple has aluminum in everything, and you use CNC milling in building these cases. Everybody that they're hiring, you can always say that they're going to work on something else that Apple is doing besides a car. But a lot of these people came from the automotive industry. But when you talk about the rumors, we don't talk about, like, for instance, their old CNC guy. I'm afraid I forgot his name, but he worked with Ford in the 90s, and he was instrumental in designing the case for the Retina MacBook Pro. So
it's not like one idea translates to only one aspect.
Yeah, it's not like if you're a CNC operator for a car, that's all you're ever going to do.
I've only built rocket ships. I can't build a better toaster at all.
Oh yeah, speaking about rocket ships, how about SpaceX this week?
It's still hard to believe we're doing that.
What, private spaceflight?
No, I get that. The idea that we can reuse rockets like that. It's absurd that on two folds. A, because we're such an entirely wasteful culture. B, because that's a huge feat to be able to take something like that and bring it back just so you can crank it out again in a couple months. That's... Oh.
Yeah, Musk tweeted today that, well, it looks like I'm going to have to build a larger rocket hangar because the mission that they sent up the SpaceX for took way more fuel and way more time than they thought it was going to. So the reentry on the new SpaceX that came down earlier today, they were operating it right on the edge of the mission parameters, and frankly, everyone was expecting a huge fireball. It was going to be hot and it was going to be loud. They were coming in way faster than they thought it was going to survive in it, and they stuck the landing. They stuck the landing in the middle of the ocean in Sea State 3. It wasn't calm seas. The freaking barge was rocking, and they stuck it.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I was promised moon bases, and I'm disappointed that we don't have one. And I'm starting to get excited about this crap again.
Well, when they're talking about Mars, you're like, well, if we keep up this pace, might be a possibility.
2040? Is that what the target date is?
I don't remember off the top of my head.
I forget what the date that the Bush administration set was. It's something like that. But you know what? Go Elon Musk. Go Elon Musk with your cars and go with your rockets. You do you, man.
SpaceX is a very good example of that, though. They have all kinds of people with all kinds of specialties coming together on this. They don't all have engineering backgrounds or physics backgrounds, and a lot of the stuff they can kind of intermingle with what he's doing with Tesla. It's not.
Yeah, there's a lot of Silicon Valley working in SpaceX.
Yeah, it's not like it's just one single set of people with certain skills. So to have an idea that some of these people from, car manufacturing come over to Apple only for cars seems a little silly.
I'm more toward the Apple Car being a real thing now with some recent properties that, are test tracks and the like, but man.
I would tend to think it would be too.
I just, thinking about the Apple price premium on things, I'm not going to lie, Apple has a price premium. There's no BS about it. And Steve Jobs refused to have things discounted. Tim Cook is okay with discounts, as evidenced by the $100 discount right now on Amazon for the MacBook, the new MacBook, mind you.
Or even doing the middle of the line phone now.
Or the SE, the iPhone SE, yeah. I don't know. I don't even want to know what this Apple Car is going to cost.
I'm going to go... It really depends what they're going to do with it. Is it going to be a fully electric car? Is it going to be a hybrid?
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of point in speculating about it, but the iPhone SE surprised me for its retail price. The phone that everyone thought was going to be $450, $500. Nope, $400. It's one of Tim Cook's first attempts at a mass market phone, right? Are they going to try the same thing with the car? Who knows? We're not going to know.
I couldn't even imagine they do
We're not going to a rose gold Apple car. I don't know, but
oh God, all the blinding of people on the highway. It's brushed aluminum, and I have no retinas.
Anyways, skipping away from the Apple Car. Apple and Enterprise. So everyone knows about the Apple IBM deal, and it's been very, very fruitful. There are over 200 apps that have been generated by the Apple IBM partnership for Enterprise. So now Apple's partnering with SAP. Is Apple's push into Enterprise, are they trying to make up for what they're not getting on the commercial market because of the economies and market headwinds?
No, I would argue, if anything else, it's more of a shift in consumer perspective.
Okay.
You have this idea that for a long time, Google was the only way to go, or Android was the only way to go if you wanted to have an enterprise device, or BlackBerry pre that. With the huge saturation of iPhone models and iPads now making the way into industry and making the way into business integration, I can see them wanting to push that even harder, because that's only going to be good for their bottom line. It's such a complex thing to shift people away from things, especially you have these large organizations that have these platforms where they're managing, thousands of devices and trying to keep them all the same and protect data at the same time. And there's going to be some ground that Apple has to make up there. So partnering with companies like SP and IBM is going to go a long way in accelerating that.
The Apple Enterprise in the 90s and early part of the 21st century was very much, well, we've got it. If you want it, talk to us and we'll sell it to you. And software, you're on your own. Get Microsoft Word, whatever. So Apple's never super pushed the enterprise market until very, very recently with, honestly, iOS. And again, I hate beating this drum because the drum the other way gets beaten all the time in our forums. Apple sells about 80 million iOS devices a quarter, and they sell about 5 million Macs a quarter. The writing is pretty clearly on the wall, but the Macs will always exist as long as they're the primary development environment for the iOS. So I'll just leave that there. And I'll just remind everybody about that. But yeah, the IBM and SAP partnerships is more about iOS and enterprise than it is about OS X and enterprise.
Phone security and device security in organizations is never the greatest thing to deal with. And it's not to say that one platform is better than another, but it always works better if everyone's on the same page.
I think one of the biggest things that's going to come out of the SAP partnership is while there are good provisioning apps right now for the iOS, I think they're going to get better through the SAP partnership.
Oh, yeah.
And that can only be good for, well, everybody. I see no downsides to this.
And while readers and listeners for MacNN might not find this a foreign opinion at all, trying to roll out Android devices to people is not the easiest task. So
yeah, I've been involved with some limited rollouts, and it's not fun.
No, it's great if you can get everyone on the same page. Get them all.
It's great if you get everyone on the same device.
Yeah, that's even better.
If you get everyone on a Nexus with stock Android, you're good. When you start doing the forks and the branches, even Samsung's branch of Android, it just gets hairy.
No, or even, I am in a situation where we have, 25 people on all S4s, just because that's where we were able to get on a good buy. Mm-hmm. But we have other people scattered out on Droid Turbos. And it's all kind of it's such a headache to deal with, because then you're dealing with different Android versions and it starts that whole cascade. iOS, it isn't as much of a problem. Obviously, there is end-of-life issues and how some of those updates will affect older phones. But man, I can just see applications in my work just giving somebody an iOS device instead of an Android and just it being 1,000 times easier.
Well, yeah, the tools that you can roll out, they're really not limited by some of the migration tools I've used for iOS. Like, okay, well, what version of iOS you're on? It doesn't even care what model phone you're on.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, you've got Retina, you're fine. And that's pretty much all it is. It's really up to the app, not the provisioning on the iOS. But on the other way around, it's up to the provisioning, not so much the apps on the Android.
And a good way to look at it too is look how Apple's gone with integration and education.
Yeah, well, with 9.3, there's a lot more in the trenches education stuff added to it. There's a lot of stuff that, frankly, they've been playing catch up to Google on iOS 9.3. The classroom stuff in 9.3 is fantastic. It's still in preview, mind you. I think they're going to be talking more about it at WWDC coming up here, not all that long. But yes, device management in schools has paved the way for device management in enterprise, I think, very much. I'm going to give our readers a preview of something I've been working on for about a month here. I'm talking with various IT departments in various schools, not just here in Fairfax County, Virginia, but throughout Virginia and DC and things like that. I'm talking to find out what kind of IT departments they have, if any, what kind of device management they have, what kind of service they have. And it's interesting. A lot of our readers, I think, have preconceived notions about what businesses and schools are doing on site for repairs. But the reality of it is even before the shift to quote unquote unrepairable computers, is IT staffs grew huge in the 90s and contracted in the aughts. So right now, most of the schools I've been talking to have one or two IT people that could easily handle the situation, who are having no problem handling the situation, because the deals that they have with tablets and things are contracts with include service contracts with Apple or IBM or whoever has sold them the hardware.
Because IT is straight away from hardware and it's more in just daily management.
Yeah. So what's happening now is whether or not it's a Compaq or a Dell or whatever, and no matter how old it is, somebody reports that the computer's broken and IT isn't even fixing it. What they're doing is they're boxing it up and they're sending it away and they get something new or repaired in exchange.
And there's always going to be outliers. But you're talking mostly education, correct? Not necessarily.
Yes.
We don't have server farms we need to deal with or secured storage that's handled by 4 people.
Oddly, some of the school districts I've talked to have got a large amount of secured storage to handle the administration for the school.
I was just thinking, how you have, it's not like a mom and pop situation or a, Fortune 500 where you're going to have this division of people that it's their sole task to make sure hardware is running at all times, mission critical, 3 layers deep.
Yeah. One school I talked with said that in 1997, let me get my numbers here. In 1997, they had 18 IT people. And they had spare parts bins and they had all these things. Right around 2002, 2003, it seems like that's when the sea change was for everybody. It seems that 2002, 2003 was the time that everyone went away from repairing stuff in-house and towards service contracts and repairs being handled by whoever sold them the gear in the first place. And between 2003 and 2006, these monolithic IT departments started to shrink. So things like partnerships with the IBM and SAP, they're not causing any further contraction or anything like this. This is all about the software and deployment rather than the hardware, which Apple hasn't changed how they deliver hardware to enterprise for 10 years, realistically. And that's before the iPad.
Yeah, you take one factor out of the equation, it's going to make it a lot easier, especially considering the overhead it costs to employ public people.
Yeah.
It's generally an unfavorable term, but, public employees do get some benefits, but they also have a lot of drawback that goes with it.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those things you have to weigh. But especially when you consider the shift of how hardware's gone, you can buy in bulk as many PCs as it probably costs to cover more than one person's salary and throw the rest away. Let's be honest.
Yeah. And even in Fairfax County, it's a rich enough county that there's a certain attrition that's expected in hardware, and it's fine. We're going to lose X number of computers this year, and that's okay. We've got it accounted for in the budget. Again, Fairfax County is one of the richer counties in the country, in the United States. And I'm not going to go, I want to talk to some of the poor areas in Virginia. I'm not trying to be nasty, but there are counties in Virginia that have no money. And I want to talk to them first before I really delve into this a lot. But I think people are not making good assumptions about enterprise and education deployments. So, and hey, SAP, we were talking about SAP when this all started. Let's play the music. We got a couple more things to talk about. So, last 2 days, the Cupertino mayor,
Barry Chang.
Now, at press time, he's starting to walk some of these comments back, but let's talk about them a little bit. He was quoted by saying that Apple is abusing Cupertino. He had said that they don't want to pay a dime in tax. They're making profit. They could share their responsibility for our city. They won't, and they abuse us. He's since said that last part of the statement, that they abuse us, was talking about somebody else, but I don't completely buy that. I think he wasn't expecting any of this to go public, and I think it did, and I think he had to walk back some stuff in an awful hurry. What he wants is he wants to ask Apple $100 million, just give us $100 million bucks. And it got shot down in city council, and he blames Apple's power in the city for the city council not voting for some of his proposals on things. Now, what he's not covering is the fact that, number one, Apple's going to return power to the grid with the new campus. They're going to be generating more power than they use. Number two, Apple is giving the city exactly what the city demands, and not a penny more and not a penny less. So it seems to me that if this is something he wanted to fix, then he can take it up with the board. And if the board refuses to fix it, the board thinks it's fine, then he's the outlier, not the board. And I understand that a company like Apple puts a strain on an area like that. Cupertino isn't a huge area. Cupertino has only 60,000 people that live in it, but Apple's also not the only company there. Seagate lives there, and Polar is there. There are 25 high-tech companies in the shadow of Apple in Cupertino, to say nothing of every place else around. The headquarters is going to have 15,000 people employed, and Apple is paying $450 million to alleviate traffic concerns around the headquarters. So, and there's discussion of a monorail, for cripe's sakes, to bring people from outside Cupertino to the Apple campus without even touching the Cupertino roads. And what this guy doesn't address either is the effect that the employees of Apple living in Cupertino have on the tax base in Cupertino. So the guy's controversial because there's a group in Cupertino that says that the mayor has failed to fulfill his fiduciary duty to Cupertino citizens and just don't care for his ideas to penalize Apple for things. I'm not sure. He's responsible. He's an elected official, and he's responsible for the city. But at what point should he get the idea that since the council is voting down his ideas and the people don't like his ideas, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is why does he keep beating this drum?
Well, isn't that the typical political spectrum? You go after something, and then when it doesn't work, you blame it on somebody else.
You blame figures. Well, what he says here, this so-called democracy, he said, and
the same one that got him voted.
They ball up the paper and throw it, and they say you're making all the wrong decisions, talking about proposals with Apple. And he says he's not going to back down, and raising taxes is not popular, but I'm not afraid. We are the center of technology, and our public transit system is old and embarrassing, and the politicians have no backbone and they get scared.
Well, there are a couple of ways to look at that. So first, I can understand how a council board, counselors, I'm not totally up to the structure and how that works there. Sometimes you have councilmen that are voted in, sometimes you have them appointed. Mm-hmm. I can honestly see them being scared of pissing off a huge company like Apple.
Right.
Because pushing that business out would hurt that community a hell of a lot.
Well, that's the thing. Apple could leave the headquarters there and just say that they're making their sales somewhere else. And that's perfectly within legality. They could move the sales to the United States to Nevada.
Yeah, and I'm just saying that is a real fear.
Because Apple has a corporate presence in Nevada, and then Cupertino gets nothing.
How much he's playing it up, I'm not saying Apple's going around lining people's pockets. That's things that corporations don't really like people to know if they ever did it.
Yeah, Apple has got a huge lobbyist group, and I have no pretenses about that. There's no question.
Yeah, but at that kind of level, you would never see that happen. And I think it's more of a community-based fear than an actual collusion. But on the other side of that, you have a huge opportunity to recoup the costs that you need to build out the infrastructure to repair all this or repair existing infrastructure by that new construction project. I'm not up to speed about how it works in California, but there are a lot of places that have things called system development charges. Mm-hmm. And the point of those costs or those charges are to help study things like traffic flows and the necessary utilities and infrastructure needed for the surrounding area, or how those costs can be recouped if you build other things in that area, and just kind of how it meshes as a whole for your community. So that is a very good place to start to get those things. Now, again, I don't know if that happens in this area. I don't know if it's just a state relegated thing in most places, but this is the period where that should have been addressed.
California politics are always kind of wacky to me. I grew up in New England, so things California, they scare me and confuse me because they're different. So it's, I guess I can't really explain to the readers very well how the Cupertino government works. But the biggest point I wanted to bring up with this is I guess I'm puzzled if they think they're being cheated. It seems to me that the onus here is on the city council and not on Apple.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different ways you can go with that. I mean, I am a former California resident, but that was in my youth, so I know how the government around there is, I guess for lack of a better way, failing its citizenship. Just the state of the highways and just the income tax collection. There's been a lot of issues with that in the past. But in terms of how they could improve the situation, man, there's so many routes they could have taken to stave that off. And the local government has a lot of that in their power to be able to impose those kind of things. Why do you think you have extra charges on your utility bill sometimes? Because there's a franchise fee associated with having that carrier in that city. Mm-hmm. And it's those little things that government gets their funding through. And government budgets are also going to be huge, even for the smallest of places. So it's not like one dime goes one place. So even if they had Apple say, oh, here's $100 million, that's not going to all go to streets. That's not all got to go to public transportation. There's a lot of places that has to go to get that done. Another
proposal he had is companies with over 100 employees, he wanted to tax them $1,000 a head.
And that's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
There's no other way to put it. That is actually, I actually wonder about how that's legal. That actually might one they can contest pretty easily.
Well, it got shot down. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's one of the things he was bitter about. And the interesting thing is he's, like I said earlier today, he started to walk some of that back, but he didn't walk back everything he said about Apple. Just a couple of words here and there trying to minimize the damage. Apparently there's a time when he was first elected that he went to the Apple campus to go talk to people and security said, "You're not invited, get out." He wanted the record corrected that he was not forcibly ejected. He was escorted out.
But at first, didn't he say he was forcibly ejected?
There's some confusion on that. We couldn't find any proof that he had been forcibly ejected. But escorted out is only slightly less severe than forcibly ejected, let's be frank.
He was convinced to leave.
Politely and at gunpoint. But no, I don't know. I wasn't there. But it's...
New Apple Taser.
I understand... Let's be clear about this. This is not about international sales. This is not about hiding money in Ireland. This is not about any of that. Well, he did say that Apple doesn't pay a dime, which is not true because they do pay everything that Cupertino asks them to pay, which is $10 million. It's 19% of their services budget. So Apple is doing what they have been told to do. Apple is doing by law what they're required to do.
And you're right. It's solely in the hands of that local government to correct that situation. And there's a lot of tools at their disposal to do it. You even have some higher end tech companies actually donating things in the forms of grants to local area charities and local area projects, schools, things like that. Or you also have like you pointed out, the cost of having those people employed in that area and how much that raises the kind of short-term economy of the entire area. I mean, cheaper services from people buying more. You might run out of housing space. That tends to be an issue when that pops up.
Though that is a huge problem in Cupertino. Housing is a giant problem there and in Mountain View. It's not just Cupertino, but it's at Google's headquarters as well.
Yeah, but they could easily say, hey, during your next expansion, if you have so many employees, we'd like to see the wage up this high, or agreements that are kind of enticing Apple to invest more in the community, not necessarily just in terms of giving the city directly money, because that does occur sometimes in lieu of things like property tax or other kind of breaks in other areas. But just raising the basic income for the area means a greater tax generation for the state, therefore a greater tax generation for the area. So I'm kind of confused why it's this one lump sum area or nothing that seems to be coming through.
I guess that's what I was puzzled with too. It seems to me that there are better longer term solutions other than give me a big old check today, or I'm going to raise this huge fuss. It seems to me that it's something that rather than go all loud and stinky in the press with, it's something that needed to be covered a little quietly, because I guarantee you now Apple's not going to do anything about it.
No, and had they actually talked to the community and gone through the channels they should have, I'm betting Apple would have either helped them put up so much money or even said, hey, you know what, we can help increase this because we realize the weight that we put on this community. Yeah. But at the same time, I don't think they'd want to do it without seeing other people doing it as well.
It's an interesting discussion. We're going to do a follow-up on it this weekend about his clarification comments, but it really doesn't lift the load off what he said about the company at all. It just kind of moderately changes course on it. It's still, what he said is still pretty damning. There's not a lot of escape from his comments here. And
it's pretty bizarre too for someone that's looking to jump the chain on the political ladder too.
Yeah, he's running for election. Let's see. Where is he running for?
Something for the state.
Yeah, he's running for something on the state level. It's not really that relevant to this particular case. But yeah, I mean, he wants to leave. He's running for a state level position. So there it is. Let's see how this all plays out. Daring strategy, Cotton. Let's see how it works out. All right, let's play the music and let's hand this off to William for a minute. So every week here on the main MacNN podcast, as opposed to William's One More Thing podcast, which we publish in the middle of the week, William pops on over and gives us his app of the week. William, what do you want to share with us this week?
My favorite Microsoft product ever is their universal foldable keyboard, an actual physical keyboard that you can fold into and pop in your bag or maybe into a large pocket. But now, my second favorite Microsoft product ever is also a keyboard, but it's an app keyboard. It's the app of the week keyboard. It's called Microsoft Flow, and it's an on-screen keyboard for iPhones. Now, since Apple copied Android and allowed other companies to make these on-screen keyboards for their phone, I think I've tried around 20, maybe, and 19 times I've come away thinking Android phones will boast about anything. Third-party keyboards are rubbish. They're a palaver when you want to switch to them, and they're irritatingly easy when you don't and it accidentally happens. They do always give you some particular new feature, but they lose others, most obviously including Apple's great autocorrection. Microsoft Flow keyboard, though, gives you 2, maybe 3 new features, and it gets around the autocorrection problem by providing its own. It's very good. Microsoft's autocorrection on this keyboard is first class. But that's still, you call that half a feature. It is excellent, but it's no better than Apple's, so it's not going to be a reason to switch by itself. Then there is another sort of half feature. Microsoft lets you customize this keyboard with various colors and images, and maybe that's your thing more than it's mine. It's certainly very nicely done, but it's not a really compelling full feature, whereas this is Flow. Rather than having to tap out each letter, you flow through it. You put your finger on the first letter and then just slide and swipe and shove until you've gone across roughly every letter in the word you want without lifting your finger. Almost all of the time, Microsoft Flow recognizes what word you meant to type and it types that in for you. It is remarkably good. When it works, those times when it doesn't are a right pain because the delete key is just oddly small and awkward. Plus, the whole thing is so very good, word by word, yet you have to take your finger off and tap the space bar between each one. Obviously, you do that on a regular keyboard too, but in this case, when you've used Flow to just write something like, hi, it feels like a chore. You're forever flowing, unflowing, doing this. Plus, getting to the comma that you probably wanted to put after hi, that is a pain. So this is clever enough to be app of the week for just this feature. Yeah, it maybe probably isn't enough to be app of the month. So far, I think it sounds like one that you might use for a bit, enjoy, certainly, but then just somehow find yourself going back to the standard Apple iOS keyboard, except there is this other feature. For as well as Flow, you've got Curve. Rather than a regular horizontal keyboard, the way it ships as by default, the Flow can be curved around the bottom, left or right of your iPhone screen. Really, it can be curved around where you put your thumb. So you can reach any letter with your thumb, and the Flow stuff works here too. So this can be a really fast and really convenient way to type. Or it can't. The same problem with having to stop for the spacebar is there. So is how awkwardly spaced the delete key is when the autocorrection's gone wrong. And actually, that's slightly worse. I found in Curve, I kept hitting delete, but sometimes return. Sometimes the letters P and L, because they're all kind of in that rough area. Plus, the control to switch your keyboard into this, to curve your keyboard around, is just silly. There's a button on the left and right of the regular keyboard, and you imagine, like every other button, you tap it to do what it does, to curve the keyboard to the left or right, but no. You have to press, hold, and swipe down. And the only way you will ever work this out is because when you tap the button, like a normal person, you get an error message telling you, no, swipe instead. Granted, it is actually rather cute how your sliding and swiping animates the keyboard move. But in all this good design and all these clever ideas, this is still from Microsoft. So sure, rather than make a control look like it works one way and then actually have it work that one way, it has to be different and give you error messages because you're wrong in how you use it. I did find that Flow was great for short messages, but the occasional errors, they got exasperating when I tended to try writing a lot. It's not really meant for writing your novel on your iPhone, but it is meant for people who dislike tap, tap, tap on the regular keyboard and yet need to write. Microsoft Flow keyboard is very, very good, despite the odd rough edge, and it's also very, very free. or it is in the US. For some reason, it's taking a time to roll out to every country. I should probably have mentioned that before trying to get you excited. Sorry about that.
All right, thanks. You can catch William and Malcolm on Thursday mornings at about 8 a.m. Eastern Time on their One More Thing podcast. A half an hour of heavy British accents and a slightly different flavor than this podcast, which this week is totally different flavor other than my banter with Charles, because as I said, my longtime partner in crime, Jordan, joined us because Charles is a little under the weather. Feel better, Charles?
We always get a little more off topic and a little more rambly whenever I'm on.
Yeah, it gets a little nutty sometimes. That's okay. It's we've been doing this a long time, so it kind of shows. Again, Jordan, thanks for stopping by. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in every week. Thank you for reading our content. If you have any questions about what we've said tonight, or you have any comments on what we've said tonight, please either leave a comment in our forums or email us at tips@MacNN.com. But until next week, I am Managing Editor Mike, and that is Contributor Jordan, and we will see you next week.
Later, folks.
Goodbye.